I was 17 the night it happened. My parents had gone out to a formal dinner 2 towns over, leaving me home alone in our quiet suburban house at the edge of the neighborhood. It was January, freezing cold. The kind of night when the sky goes black before 6 and the streets outside feel completely deserted. I'd microwaved some leftover pasta, sat down on the couch and turned on the TV. The sliding glass door to our deck was right behind me. I had left the vertical blinds slightly open so I could see the yard. The snow on the grass glowed faintly under a neighbor's porch light. It felt peaceful, almost too quiet. The first sound was so faint I thought I imagined it. A tiny tap against the glass. Then another. At first I told myself it was just ice shifting in the cold. But when I muted the TV, I heard it again, slow, deliberate, like a finger tapping the window. I pulled the blinds just enough to peek through. My stomach dropped. A man was standing inches from the glass. He was tall, his face pale, his breath fogging a faint oval on the glass. His eyes were lost in shadow, but he was staring right at me. I froze. For a few seconds I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then instinct kicked in and I yanked the blinds shut with shaking hands. The house was silent again until I heard the faint rattle of the door handle. He was testing it, slowly, patiently. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering into the receiver that there was a man trying to get into my house. The operator told me to stay calm, lock myself in a room, and wait for officers. But as she spoke, I heard footsteps on the deck, heavy boots pacing back and forth, circling, pausing, then moving again. I took the baseball bat from the closet and ran upstairs to my room, locking the door behind me. My heart was hammering so loud I thought he could hear it through the walls. Then, from downstairs, came 3 knocks at the front door. Not police knocks, not urgent, just slow, deliberate thuds. The operator asked if I'd heard an officer identify themselves. I whispered no. The knocks came again, louder this time. Then the lights flickered, dimming for a second before sputtering back. I realized with horror that the breaker box was outside, right near the deck. He had been there too. Minutes dragged by. Then came a new sound, heavy pounding and a commanding voice shouting police. Open up. The operator confirmed it. Officers had arrived. I crept down and opened the door with the chain still on. Blue lights flashed across the snow, and a uniformed officer showed me his badge. They searched the property. The deck was covered in boot prints, fresh, pacing back and forth, circling the slider. The glass itself still carried a faint oval smear where his face had pressed against it. But whoever he was gone. Nothing ever came of it. No one was caught. And yet, to this day, I can sit in a room with a glass door at night without imagining a pale face on the other side, fogging the window with slow, patient breaths. This happened a couple of years ago, when I was home alone for an entire weekend. My parents had gone on a short trip, leaving me in charge of the house. I was used to being alone by then, and honestly, I kind of enjoyed it. No rules, no interruptions. That Saturday night, I stayed up in my room, scrolling on my phone with the lights low and some music playing quietly in the background. It was around midnight when I heard it for the first time. At first I thought it was just in my head. A faint, slow sound, almost like wind through a vent. But then I realized what it really was. Breathing, deep, heavy breathing, coming from the other side of my bedroom door. I froze, listening hard. The sound was steady inhale, exhale, inhale, like someone pressing their mouth right against the wood. My chest tightened. For a full minute I couldn't move, couldn't even swallow. My first thought was that it had to be my imagination. But then the breathing got louder. Whoever it was, they were leaning closer, right there, just inches away from me. I whispered, "Hello," and instantly, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bed and crept toward the door. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought it might give me away. After a few shaky breaths, I turned the lock and flung the door open. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The house was dead quiet. I walked through every room upstairs, checking closets, even the bathroom. No one was there. For a second, I convinced myself it had just been my brain playing tricks. But when I went back to my room, something was different. My window, the one that looked out over the backyard, was wide open. I never leave it unlocked, let alone open. The curtains were swaying gently, and the winter air poured into the room, chilling me to the bone. I ran downstairs, flicking on every light I could, searching the entire house from top to bottom. Nothing. Every door was still locked. But that didn't matter. Someone had been inside. I called my parents, voice shaking, and they told me to keep every light on until they got back the next morning. I sat in the corner of the living room all night, clutching the bat, unable to close my eyes. Every creak of the house made me jump. I'll never forget the sound of that breathing, slow and heavy, as if whoever it was wanted me to hear them, like they were waiting for me to open the door. And to this day, I can sleep in that room without checking the window 3 times before I turn off the lights. This happened about 5 years ago, when I was still living at my parents' house. We had one of those old landline phones that sat on the kitchen counter. Hardly anyone used it anymore. Everyone just called our cell phones, so when it rang, it was usually either a telemarketer or my grandparents. It was a Wednesday night. I was home alone, heating up something on the stove. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the microwave and the tick of the clock in the hallway. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt until the phone rang. I picked it up without thinking. "Hello." There was silence for a moment. Then a man's voice, low and rasping, whispered, "I can see you." The hairs on my neck stood up. I froze, waiting for the punchline, but none came. No laughter. No hang-up, just breathing. I slammed the phone down and stood there, heart racing. My first thought was that it had to be a prank. Maybe some random creep dialed a number and decided to mess with whoever answered. I shook it off and went back to the stove. But less than a minute later, the phone rang again. This time, I hesitated before picking up. Slowly, I lifted the receiver to my ear. The same voice, the same words. "I can see you." I hung up again, harder this time, my hands sweaty against the plastic. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was just someone with the wrong number. But then I realized the voice wasn't asking if I could see him. He was stating it, like it was a fact. I turned off the stove and walked upstairs, the phone still in my hand. From the window in my room, I could see the front yard. That's when my stomach dropped. At the end of the driveway, half hidden in the shadows near the streetlight, was a man. He was standing perfectly still, one hand holding a cell phone to his ear. He wasn't moving, wasn't pacing, wasn't doing anything except staring up at the house. My legs went numb. I ducked back from the window so fast I nearly tripped over my desk chair. My heart was pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. I couldn't believe it. This wasn't some prank caller. He was really there. I dialed 911 immediately, whispering into the phone that there was a man outside my house calling me, saying he could see me. The dispatcher kept me calm. told me to lock every door and stay away from the windows. I crouched in the hallway with the cordless phone pressed against my ear, trying not to breathe too loudly. From upstairs, I could still see a faint slice of the street through the curtains. The man hadn't moved. He just stood there, phone to his ear, head tilted slightly toward the house. The dispatcher told me officers were on their way. I stayed there, crouched and shaking, for what felt like forever. Then, suddenly, he was gone. I didn't see him leave. One moment he was there, and the next the driveway was empty. My stomach twisted as I realized I had no idea which way he'd gone. The dispatcher told me to stay put. Minutes later, I saw the red and blue lights of a patrol car wash across the walls. 2 officers checked the area, shining flashlights along the street and into the yard. They didn't find him. No footprints in the snow, no sign of a car pulling away. Just emptiness. They told me they de-patrolled the neighborhood for the rest of the night and advised me not to answer strange calls again. After they left, I sat in my room with every light on, gripping a baseball bat until my parents came home. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time the house creaked, I imagined footsteps in the yard. Every shadow through the curtains looked like a man with a phone in his hand. The police never caught anyone. We stopped using the landline not long after that. My dad eventually disconnected it altogether. But to this day, whenever my cell phone rings late at night, I hesitate before answering. Because in the back of my mind, I still hear that whisper, calm, certain I can see you. I was 16 when this happened. My parents left for 3 nights to visit my aunt, and I was stubborn about staying home. I liked the quiet. I liked the small routines that made me feel older than I was. Lock the doors, set the alarm, leave the hall light on, heat a frozen dinner, pretend the house was mine. The first night was fine. I fell asleep on the couch with the TV low and woke up to the morning light. The second night felt different. Snow had started to fall, the kind that makes the world feel padded and far away. By 10, the neighborhood was silent. I turned off the kitchen light and headed down the hallway. That's when I heard it. A slam from the back of the house. Not loud, but sudden. Wood on wood. I froze and listened. There was nothing for a long few seconds, and then the furnace kicked on and drowned it out. I told myself it was the heat shifting the old doors. I brushed my teeth, checked the front lock again, and went to my room. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a soft sound. It took me a second to place it. A door easing open, a hinge giving a slow breath. It was the basement door. I sat up and stared at my bedroom door, as if that would help. The house settled once and went still again. I told myself to stop. I told myself to sleep, but the picture kept forming in my head. That narrow door at the end of the hall, the one that always sticks near the top, pulled open an inch at a time by a patient hand. I got out of bed, took the baseball bat from behind the dresser, and cracked my door. The hallway was a tube of weak light from the nightlight near the stairs. At the far end, the basement door was open. Not all the way. Just enough that I could see darkness between door and frame. I stood there longer than I holding my breath like the house was holding its own. Then I said my name out loud, quiet and calm, like someone announcing themselves to an empty room. No answer. I walked the hall, bare feet cold on the wood, and put my ear to the door. It was quiet down there, too quiet. No hum from the old dehumidifier. No ticking from the hot water tank. The quiet felt like something had been laid over every sound. I turned the knob and let the door drift wider. The smell reached me first, Cold air and dust, but something else too. Fabric that had held a body's heat and then lost it. I clicked the stairlight. It didn't come on. The bulb had burned out. I took my phone, turned on the flashlight, and angled the beam down the stairs. The cone of light caught the handrail, the rough concrete wall, the grey steps, one by one. I told myself to be smart and go back to my room and call 911. Instead, I started down, bat in my other hand, careful not to let the steps groan. At the bottom, the cold wrapped my ankles. The floor was half concrete, half old carpet from before we moved in. My light found the washer and dryer, the stacked boxes, the workbench. Then it found something that didn't belong. A blanket folded on the carpet like a nest. Next to it, a plastic grocery bag with food wrappers inside. An empty water bottle. A cheap phone charger plugged into an outlet on the far wall. I stood very still. The light on my phone shook and made the shadows move like breath. There was a corner behind the furnace I couldn't see. I aimed the beam there and saw the curve of a plastic bin and the edge of a coat. The coat was hanging from a pipe. It could have been old. It could have been left by the previous owner. But the sleeves were dustless. The hem had a wet line from snowmelt. I backed up the steps without turning around. At the top, I closed the door and turned the lock and leaned my weight into it like the wood might push back. The house was so quiet I could hear the compressor in the fridge from the kitchen. I went to my room, turned the lock there too, and called 911. The dispatcher asked if I'd seen someone. I said no. She asked if anything was missing. I said I didn't know. She told me to stay in my room until officers arrived and to keep her on the line. I stood in the middle of the room with the bat and tried not to look at my closet. The carpet felt thin. The window felt like a mouth. I listened for footsteps from below and heard nothing. 5 minutes, 10. Far away, a car passed, its tires whispering on fresh snow. When the officers knocked, it was the kind of knock that leaves no doubt. They called my name and told me to stand back as they unlocked the basement door. I followed them only far enough to see their lights move through the dark like careful insects. "There's a blanket," I said, "and wrappers." One officer stayed with me. The other two went to the far corner. They found more than I saw. A toothbrush in a cup, a cheap disposable razor, a small notebook with the first few pages torn out. The coat on the pipe had a bus transfer in the pocket dated 2 days earlier. On the workbench, under a stack of newspapers, was a small ring of keys, none of which fit our locks. We all stood there for a moment, the breath of the house visible in white clouds from the basement cold. The older officer said someone had been staying here. The younger pointed with his chin to the stairs. The underside of 2 steps had faint scuffs that were newer than the wood around them. He listened. The younger said, "Sat on the 3rd step down, just out of sight." They searched the yard. There were prints under the small basement window. A path cut through the side yard to the back fence. The officer at the back door called the others over and showed them a scrap of metal wedged in the door jamb. Thin and bent, the kind of thing you slide against a latch to make it forget its job. It was old, but not that old. Snow had kept it clean. They didn't find him. They took the bag, the blanket, the charger, the razor, the keys. They wrote a report and offered to sit a car at the end of the block for a few hours. I said yes. The older officer told me to keep lights on, to call if anything changed, to have someone stay with me that night. I told him my parents were coming home in the morning. He nodded in a way that said he wished it was sooner. I slept with the light on, or pretended to. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the coat sleeve, dustless. Every time the furnace started, I thought I heard a foot on the underside of a stair. In the morning, I went to the basement with my dad. We replaced the bulb and stood in the fresh light that made everything look too ordinary. The outline where the blanket had been was still pressed into the carpet. My dad knelt by the wall and stared at the outlet. The charger had left a faint scratch arc on the paint where it dangled. He unplugged it like it might shock him. We put a deadbolt on the basement door that afternoon. We screwed plywood over the small window, even though it made the room darker. We talked about cameras and motion sensors. We pretended we were making decisions and not just keeping our hands busy. 2 days later, after the snow melted a little, I noticed something at the top of the basement stairs. A coin, a dime, placed on the second step, centered. It wasn't there when we added the lock. I bent to pick it up and saw a second coin at the bottom, on the last step before the concrete. Another dime, shiny, new. I stood very still and listened to the hum of the house. I don't know what the coins meant. Maybe nothing. Maybe someone marking where they sat or counting nights. I put them in a drawer and locked it and told no one. It felt like admitting them out loud would make more of them appear. We live in the same house. The deadbolt is still on the basement door. The plywood is still over the window. When I go down there for laundry, I keep the bat by the stairwell and do not stand on the third step. I move fast. I do not look at the corner behind the furnace for long. I do not think about the coat. At night, when the heat cuts off and the ducts cool and tick, I hear a single soft sound from the end of the hall. A hinge easing open in my head. A door I locked twice with a deadbolt, finding a way to breathe anyway. The house learned new rules after that. Lights left on, doors checked twice. Hallway walked with a voice. But sometimes, late, when the snow makes the world padded and far away, I wake sure that someone is sitting just out of sight on the wrong side of a thin door, listening to the softness of my steps and measuring the distance between us in quiet, careful breaths. This happened last year during a bad storm. My parents were out at a friend's house, and I had the entire evening to myself. The rain started just before sundown, pounding against the roof and windows so hard it sounded like static in the air. Around 9, the lights flickered twice and then went out completely. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm itself. I lit a couple of candles in the living room and turned on the flashlight on my phone. With the rain hammering outside and no TV or music, every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. I tried to focus on scrolling my phone, telling myself I'd ride it out until the power came back. About half an hour later, I looked toward the hallway that connected the living room to the bedrooms and froze. A face was there, pale, featureless, peeking around the corner just enough that I could see the outline of a head and the blank oval of a face. It wasn't moving, it wasn't hiding, it was just there, watching me. I blinked hard, convinced it had to be a trick of the candlelight or my own shadow stretched across the wall. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became. The face wasn't mine. It wasn't part of the house. And then, slowly, it pulled back out of sight. My throat was dry. I grabbed a kitchen knife and stood in the center of the room, shaking. I kept telling myself to call the police, but my phone had no signal. The storm must have knocked it out. I held the knife tighter and waited, heart slamming in my chest. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming from the staircase that led to the second floor. They creaked one by one, deliberate, like whoever it was wanted me to hear them. That was enough for me. I bolted out the front door into the rain, clutching my knife and phone. I sat in my car, soaked and shivering, until the storm eased and the lights of the neighborhood blinked back to life. When my parents came home later that night, we searched the house from top to bottom. Every door was locked. Every window was shut. Nothing was missing. They told me I must have imagined it, that fear and candlelight had tricked me into seeing something that wasn't there. But I know what I saw. I know the blank shape of that face wasn't my imagination. And the sound of those footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, heavy still, plays in my head whenever the power goes out. I've never sat in that living room the same way again. Even now, I can't look down that hallway at night without imagining a pale head slowly leaning out, waiting for me to notice. That was 5 disturbing, true Home Alone stories. Stories like these remind us that sometimes the scariest things don't come from nightmares or movies, but from the real world when we least expect them, in the places we feel the safest. Whether it's a stranger testing your doors, a faceless figure in the dark, or the sound of someone breathing just beyond the walls. One thing is certain, being home alone will never feel the same again. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed these stories and want to hear more, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. And remember, next time you find yourself alone at home, double check your locks, close the blinds, and listen carefully. Because sometimes what you think is your imagination might not be.